Hello, everyone. This is Liz. Sorry for being a little late, technical difficulties. So, we have a new feature on Wednesdays now since I'm at the library, and it is going to be Liz's Picks Library Edition. So, since we have curbside pickup now and you can get items that are at dairy and put them on hold and pick them up here, I figured what better way to give you recommendations and what better thing to do than say, hey, here's what's at the library right now. So if you're looking for stuff to get from the Dairy Public Library, I have some things for you. So the first is a book called Everywhere You Don't Belong by Gabriel Bump. This was a kind of just an on the fly pick for me. It looked interesting, I gotta admit, graphic design on the cover kind of got me. And it's just about a young man who grows up in Chicago and is trying to figure out where he belongs. The storytelling is linear, but it kind of jumps around from you know, 1 year in the future, 1 month in the future. It's not a straight narrative, but I found it very compelling, and it's a quick read, and it's incredibly well written. You definitely get a sense of this character's voice, and it's a very I kind of want to read what this author has written more of. Up next is a nonfiction book called The Girls Who Went Away by Anne Fessler. Um, Make sure you can get the cover. I read this way back when I was in grad school, and I forget where I'd initially heard about it. I think it might have been a Jezebel article, but this is about women in the 50s and 60s who surrendered their children for adoption, some cases by choice, sometimes not. And it's an interesting book because it does sort of dispel a lot of these ideas we had about the 50s being so wholesome and that, unintended pregnancy was never a problem before, I don't know, 25 years ago. And you get it's a very, it's a kind of a mosaic of all of these different women and their different stories. And of course, one of the things that's pretty prevalent is these girls are the ones who had to bear the consequences of what happened, whereas the people that got them pregnant just went on with their lives like there was no issue. And I like the fact that there was never one specific story. There were some cases where the woman looked for the children she put up for adoption forever. There were some that thought about them. And then there were women who didn't want to be found, who just were like, that was a bad part of my life and I want to move on and I never want to go any further on that. So I think if you'd like a narrative of a lot of, different women, unfortunately it's real, and a good understanding of, you know, what it was like for women back in the 50s and 60s, The Girls Who Went Away is a very good book. Up next, of course, we're doing graphic novel recommendations for me, and I have Sabrina by Nick um, DiNarso. I hope I'm saying his name right. Now, this was actually, fun fact, this was one of not one of, this was the first graphic novel to be shortlisted for the Booker Prize. And that's huge because graphic novels, for years, pretty much since their inception, have had to fight to be considered real books. Spoiler alert, they are. So this is a story, it's entitled Sabrina, but Sabrina, the woman in question, she is dead for most of this. This is a woman who goes missing. She is kidnapped, and we actually learn what happens to her in this. And what actually the perspective we're given is this man who is sheltering or giving shelter to her boyfriend, who's just obviously really broken up about the situation. And also, it's a good commentary on conspiracy theory culture and how these narratives of it was a false flag, it never happened, this woman is alive, similar to what we saw with like Alex Jones and Sandy Hook in that conspiracy, kind of touches on that here. The art style is not for everybody, but I really got into this book and I couldn't put it down. I think it's a fantastic story. So I'm going to go a little bit lighter now. A couple of books were a little heavy. So this was one that I heard a couple of years ago on the podcast I listened to, Majority Report with Sam Cedar. He interviewed this author, Mary Otto, about her book Teeth. This is a story of beauty, inequality, and the struggle for oral health of America. So I didn't think too much about teeth other than I have to brush them, and my uncle, who is a dentist, constantly telling me to stop eating sugar. Finally happened, by the way. But I would listen to the interview and I was just really fascinated. It talks about how dental care became separate from the rest of medical care the vanity aspect of it, and how hard it is for so many Americans to actually get good dental care. So, again, you might not be interested in teeth at all, but this book was fantastic and endlessly interesting. So, highly recommend it. Up next, this was my favorite book from last year. This is another graphic novel. It is Kid Gloves by Lucy Neasley. I'm a huge fan of her work, and this might be the best thing that she has ever put out. Her work has always got a personal aspect, and this is as personal as it gets. This talks about her struggle to get pregnant and the fairly tumultuous pregnancy that she had, including the fact that she almost died giving birth, and a lot of the reason she died was because her doctor didn't listen to her when she brought up concern. She still manages to keep the book overall very lighthearted and fun, and there's also a lot of great pregnancy research in there. I loved this book. I've been recommending it to everybody, and it's one of the most heartwarming books I've read in a while. It's wonderful. I hope you will check it out. So this wouldn't be a Liz's Picks without some movies. And first up is a movie by one of my favorite human beings of all time, Polyester by John Waters. This is the new Criterion edition. If you don't know who John Waters is, he is a provocateur in a way. He is a director. He is an author. He has been on The Simpsons. He's been on RuPaul's Drag Race. He has some infamy for some of his earlier films like Female Trouble and Desperate Living, and of course Pink Flamingos. But in early 80s, New Line decided, okay, we're going to give you some money to make a mainstream feature film. And what he ended up making was a satire not only of the changing social mores of the late 70s, early 80s, he also did this in the style of the Douglas Sirk melodramas from the 50s. And Divine, his muse, if you will, plays Francine Fishpaw, poor put-upon housewife who's just trying to deal with her wild children and her philandering husband. And then former teen heartthrob Tab Hunter enters the picture. It is one of the best satires I've ever seen and one of the best comedies ever made. And I would say it's probably your best entry point to John Waters. I think his early stuff is, you are either going to want to watch it or not. But I think this is a good mix of his early stuff and his older stuff. Or newer stuff, sorry. Up next is Dr. Sleep. So, I love the movie The Shining. It's one of my favorite films. It's definitely something I watch whenever there is a snowstorm. I was very skeptical when I heard Stephen King wrote a sequel because, as much as I like Stephen King, I don't think he can end a book, and a lot of his books are kind of bad. My opinion. It's okay to like a book. So I was I was even more skeptical when I heard it was being made into a movie because I'm like, how are you going to make a sequel to a movie that came out 40 years ago? Color me surprised when a lot of the horror blogs and horror, people on Twitter and whatnot were saying this movie's good. And I'm watching it, and yes, it is good. It's a little long, but I would say this is a fantastic sequel to The Shining. And just for the fact that it surprised me so much, I'm recommending it. Also, eternal crush Ewan McGregor. Up next, a movie that I loved last year and I love recommending to people, The Farewell. So this is by Lulu Wang, and it is, quote, based on an actual lie. So this is about a young Chinese American woman. She finds out her grandmother, her beloved Nai Nai, is dying of cancer. No one in the family is telling her. So she's going over to China. They're having a fake wedding just so everyone can gather and say goodbye to Nai Nai. So she has to shoulder this burden of knowing her grandmother is dying. And I think the perspective of having a Chinese American woman write and direct this is important because we do get a perspective as to why the family's doing this. They're not lying out of malice. They see it as we are shouldering this burden for our family members so they don't have to walk around knowing this. I think it's a great movie. It's a great family film. It's also a good comedy and a good drama as well. And it'll make you want to call your grandma if they're here. Up next is, we have two biographies to finish it out. The first is Life Itself, and this is the biofilm or bio documentary of Roger Ebert. Roger Ebert is a very influential person to me. I don't quite know when I started watching Siskel and Ebert. I think my parents are like, you like movies, watch these two guys. But he greatly helped me, or helped form my understanding of films, and also how to grade a film based on what they are trying to do, not what I want it to be. Like a good example is the film 2012, which is a disaster movie. He gave it 4 stars, and he said, "I'm giving it 4 stars because it is doing what it's setting out to do. It's not trying to be a deep movie. It's trying to be a disaster film, and it's succeeding." So he helped me on that aspect, and he also helped me discover a lot of other movies because he supported a lot of small features. And his celebrity death is one of the few celebrity deaths I genuinely did break down crying at. Especially because I think a day or two before he had just written this kind of a goodbye. I guess in retrospect he knew it was happening, but it was I'm getting off the internet for a while. But deep down I think he knew his time was up. But he was someone who influenced me a lot in how I watch movies. So uh, I am glad he can share part of his life with other people. And finally, the movie I'm going to recommend today, it's a documentary called I Am Not Your Negro, and this is directed by Raoul Peck. This is actually nominated for Best Documentary the same year as Ava DuVernay's The 13th in 2016. And this is about author James Baldwin. If you don't know who James Baldwin is, he was a writer, commentator, essayist in like the 50s and 60s, and he wrote a lot about race in America. He also wrote a little about being queer in America as well. And I think he was the one who had the phrase like, to be a black man in America is to constantly be mad. I don't think I'm quoting that right, so I'm sorry. But either way, he is someone who has a lot of insight, or can give people a lot of insight. And I think this is a documentary that does a lot of justice in showing who he was and his work. I think he's had kind of a renaissance in public because of this documentary and the film If Beale Street Could Talk. And I think there's a lot of people right now who are looking for things to watch or things to read in order to understand what's going on and understand why there are a lot of people who are angry about what's happening. And I think that's a place where art is really powerful. It's not just there to entertain you, it can help broaden your understanding and your horizons of the world. So I would say if you want a good start, Raoul Peck's I Am Not Your Negro is one to watch. And again, all of these items are available at the Derry Public Library, and you can put them on hold either by going to our website, derrypl.org, or by calling us, and we can pull them from the shelf for you. Have a good day, and I will see you tomorrow.